Welcome, everybody. How's my sound? Good, can you hear me okay in the back? Is it too loud? Okay, remember, this is only our third time back, so we're still working out the little kinks here and there. Welcome to a celebration of literature and living writers. My name is Megan Marshall. I'm the director of the Hugh C. Hyde Living Writers series, and very much enjoying our triumphant return to LL 430 and all the in-personness that comes with it. Yay! But I would also like to acknowledge this space that we are privileged to share. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State University community, we acknowledge this legacy. I'd also like to take a moment to thank those folks who have helped to make this event and this series possible, and that includes Markle Tumlin, my fabulous co-host, hanging out in the back here. Also, our other friends from Love Library, Danya Winkle Hall, Laurel Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. I'd also like to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature and instructionally related activities for their continued support of our series, as well as Mikel Ramirez and our friends from Aztec Shop who are selling books over there in the corner. How about a round of applause for all of our contributors? And just a couple reminders, if you haven't done so already, please silence your cell phones. Thank you very much. And know that this event is being recorded. However, we can only see this, so don't worry, the backs of your heads are not going to get famous or anything like that. All right, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce tonight's featured reader. Lizz Huerta is a widely admired short story writer and essayist. She's been published in Lightspeed, The Cut, The Portland Review, The Rumpus, Miami Rail, and more. Huerta has also been a 2018 Bread Loaf Fellow, a 5-time VONA Fellow, and the winner of the LUMINA Fiction Contest selected by Roxane Gay, who called her writing a menacing, inescapable seduction. And just FYI, you've basically won at life if your work has ever been acknowledged by Roxane Gay, let alone celebrated. So this is winning. Huerta has appeared on C-SPAN's Book TV to discuss the erasure of Mexican American studies in Arizona, and has taught creative writing to homeless youth through our local San Diego nonprofit, So Say We All. Lizz Huerta's debut young adult fantasy novel, The Lost Dreamer, a decade in the making, from which she'll be reading tonight, has been lauded by critics and fellow authors alike as a transcendent story of community, sisterhood, and resilience set in a richly drawn world. And perfect for readers who love rich world building and want to see patriarchal structures burned down. I am perhaps one of those latter readers and was moved deeply by the ways in which women characters are centered and celebrated in the novel, and even further by how the narrative highlights representation not commonly seen in YA fantasy, by blurring gender binaries and Western beauty standards, among other things. Of the impetus, Huerta states, as much as I loved fantasy, when I wanted to place myself in that world, I'd have to change everything about myself. My hair color, my eye color, my skin color. The world has ignored half the planet's stories in the service of the other half of the planet's stories for hundreds of years. And I'm just like, nah, that's over now. Yes. The world needs more stories like those of protagonist Indir and Cyan, the Lost Dreamer. And we're so lucky to be joined tonight by an author who is dedicated to giving them a voice and a long-deserved seat at the often exclusionary literary table. So please join me in welcoming Lizz Huerta.
I am so excited. I've been coming to this room for a really long time for readings, so the fact that I get to be at this podium is kind of amazing. So most of you are writers, yeah, kind of, sort of. If you're a writer, you write. I mean, if you write, you're a writer, is what I tell people all the time, because we're all made of our stories. And I think that's one of the things I wanted to focus on mostly in The Lost Dreamer is the absolute fact that our stories are all interconnected all the time, even when we don't realize that our stories are interconnected. They are, and the tiny little stories that we're living, the tiny little dramas that we're living are part of a larger, vaster, endless, eternal network of stories. That stories, as I say in the book, don't end, they just change shape. So a little bit about me. Thank you so much for the incredible bio, Megan. And I like how you just quoted me. Nah, I do. It's always, you never know what you say when you're doing interviews, and then you read back and you're just like, that was bold. So, or really like, why did I say that? That sounds like just not great. So I was born and raised here on Kumeyaay land in Chula Vista, just a few miles from the border, to Mexican and Puerto Rican parents. My parents were born in Mexico and Puerto Rico, and I was the first of my entire family to be born on this side of the political border. I grew up in a cult, Jehovah's Witness, and would disappear into stories as a child because I wasn't allowed to have friends. I wasn't allowed to really engage with the world because I was just being raised for the apocalypse all the time. Like every day I'd wake up and think, is it today? Is the world ending today? And it didn't. But I was very lonely. So I retreated into fantasy worlds from the time I was very little. And I started writing fantasy worlds from the time I was very little. My very first story, I couldn't even write yet. I had a Fisher-Price tape recorder, and it's so cute. My parents have the cassette tape. I had a lisp and a nasal condition, and I wrote this story about a beautiful Pegasus unicorn. And I've been writing ever since. So, but as I've said many times, every time I wanted to place myself into any story that I loved, into any literature, I had to change everything about myself. I had to change my hair, my skin, what my family looked like, what the bodies of the people I loved looked like. I never saw anybody who looked like me or the people who I was raised with and who I was being loved by. I never saw them in any stories. And that's really hard as a kid. It isn't until you're older you realize what an incredible violence that is, that invisibility is a violence, that erasure is an absolute violence. And when I started writing, all my worlds and characters were populated by characters who didn't look like me, because I didn't know that I was allowed to write about people who looked like us until I was a little bit older. I'm a college dropout. I have severe ADHD. I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult, so I couldn't handle school. So instead, I went into my family's construction business and worked as an iron painter. I still work as an iron painter sometimes, actually. I worked as an iron painter for about 20 years until I sold The Lost Dreamer when I turned 40. I like to say this because I think there's this idea that in order to be a published author, in order to be a storyteller, we have to follow this very particular Western idea of what education is, when the truth is, like, every single one of us is a storyteller. Every single one of us has the potential to create. And much of The Lost Dreamer was actually written on construction sites in the back of my truck. I'd wear this apron every day, and I had a little journal in my pocket, and I'd be on ladders painting, listening to audiobooks or listening to music, and ideas would come, characters would come, lines would come. And at lunch break, I would sit in the back of my truck and write parts of this book. So this book is a working class novel in so many ways. It was written while I was having to use a porta potty. So, and in the story is the story of two young women. I think most of you have read it probably. Indira and Saya, who were born with the same gift, the ability to enter a different dimension when they sleep at night and to bring home information for their communities. One of the things that I really wanted to explore in this book, as someone who is of Indigenous descent but has been detribalized because of erasure and colonization and all these things, like, what are the gifts that live in us, both within a tradition and outside of a tradition, right? Indira in the book is a dreamer, and she's born into the sacred city of Alcanza, into a lineage of dreamers. She has rituals, she has protections, she has her mother, her aunts, her sisters, all carrying her through this gift in a city, in a society that supports this gift. And Saya, my other dreamer, is born in the wild, and she has no training, no ritual, no protection, nobody to teach her her gift. But it doesn't mean that her gift has any less value. It's still within her. And I think there's so many of us whose families have been on this land, born and died and feeding our children on this landmass for centuries, who are now disconnected from our cultures and from our languages. But it doesn't mean that those gifts and that knowledge and that connection to the earth doesn't exist, just because we don't have the traditions and the rituals. And of course we can go back and learn, but a lot of times it's just gone. But it lives in different ways. I was just in Mexico this weekend, where my father was born, and there was a hurricane coming, and I was getting texts from people saying a hurricane's about to hit you. It's a category 4. And I was completely stressed out because I was staying right on the beach and this huge hurricane was coming, and I was looking at it at the news. And I was at the rancho, the ranch, where my family has mango orchards, and I was completely stressing out about the hurricanes. And my super rancho uncle with the silver teeth like grabbed me by the arm, and he's like, "Come outside, I'm gonna show you something." And I was like, "What? How are you gonna show me how you're gonna board up the house?" And he goes, "Let me show you something." And he took me to the Guanacaste tree, this big tree that's been in my family who knows how long. And he pointed at the roots, and he's like, "Look at the ants." And I was like, "Yes, there are ants here." And he goes, the hurricane is gonna be fine. We are not gonna get hit by the hurricane. The hurricane isn't gonna do anything to us. Look at the ants. The ants know, and I trust the ants. And I was like, oh, that wisdom still exists in the land. It still exists in our bodies. It still exists in the stories. And he was right. The hurricane didn't hit, and we were completely fine. So let me hydrate just a little bit before I come into this. So in this part of the book, Saya, my character who was born in the wild without a gift, is going into the dream to get some information for somebody who's becoming her friend in the waking world, this woman who wants to have a baby. Saya wears a protection necklace that she's worn since her birth. She doesn't know the full story of it. You don't find it out till the end of the book, but she wears this protection necklace, and the spirits and entities she interacts with in dreaming are always a little bit funny with her, and she can't figure out why. So in this scene, she has an abusive mother, Salai, who's a terrible character, but she has her reasons. And she's made her daughter sleep outside at night as punishment. And I'm just going to go into her going into the dream and meeting a spirit who is going to help change her life. I was in dreaming. I was in what I knew was a desert, though I had never known one in the waking world. Even in dreaming, the air barely carried the memory of water. There was a creek bed, dry and overgrown with skeletal remnants of plants. There was a sensation, a hunger in the land that seemed to pulse, telling me it had once been a sacred place and wanted to be again. I knelt at the edge of the creek, touching my fingers to one of the dried out plants. Sharp thorns stabbed upward, begging for a snag of skin. I brushed my fingertips against them. The power dormant in the plant sparked into being. I closed my eyes and cast myself into the memory of what once was. Running water, vegetation clinging to the edge of the banks, roots following their thirst, the upward rush of life in bloom, flowers beckoning insects and birds. This was a part of my gift I was learning, imagining into existence, creating where I wanted to be. I felt a push in the air, a presence discovering itself once more. I tasted the water in the air. It was happening. Imagine more, a rasping voice said. I kept my eyes closed, but inclined my head to acknowledge her presence. She was an older spirit, nearly forgotten in the waking world. I could tell by how she seemed to smolder. I imagined water rushing forth and smiled when I heard a drip, then the whispers of water rushing to tumble rocks from its path as life returned. She sighed and I opened my eyes. Are you the spirit of this place? I asked, my eyes soft on her as she came into focus. She was older. She must have been the spirit Yakaku told me about. the one Gruta needed. As memory rose in the land, the spirit remembered herself as well. I am Wotal, and you are not from the lands where once they spoke my name, she said. I was surprised she gave me her name. She must have been still a very long time and wanted her name spoken. There is someone in your world who wishes to give birth, little dreamer. I flinched when she called me dreamer. I was not a dreamer, though I could enter the dream. I was not from Alganza, half a world away. I was not born to the temple of night. I didn't know why the gift had chosen me. My mother had warned me never to ask. I took a deep breath. There was a woman, Ruta, who wants to give birth, be a mother, but she has been unable to keep a child in her body. We ask for your blessing. I waited. Wotal stared into the running water, then reached her hand out to me. Show me her face, she said. I took her hand, gasping. A river seemed to rise within me, pulsing, vast, flooding me with joy and longing. I closed my eyes and allowed the feeling to flow through me. I wanted to grieve. I wanted to dance. I wanted to press my face to the damp earth of the creek bed and taste the memories of all the water that had ever flowed by. She released my hand, and too quickly I was myself again. Oh, little dreamer. Wotal's eyes were full of pity. She touched my face, and again, briefly, I was overcome with emotions not my own. I am not a dreamer. My name is Saya. Can you not help her? A small panic rose in me. I can, and I will. I know what it is like to be dry and without life. She will give birth by Nightbird, though no one can guarantee what happens after. Wotal's smile was sad. It is the way of birthing. All who birth know it. I ask that one of the child's names be mine, and they always keep an altar to me. I know that soon enough I will cease to exist in this form, but I would like to stay a little longer, offer help where I can for the turmoil that is coming. I nodded, confused and relieved. Her eyes went to my necklace. I think I pronounced this. Her eyes went to my necklace. You always wear that, don't you? My hand went to the familiar stones. A protection my mother placed on me at birth, I said. She was not the first spirit to comment on my protection. That is the truth, even if it isn't shaped the way you believe it to be. Wotal smiled. A gift for you, if you will accept it. I hesitated. My mother warned me to be careful when offered gifts from spirits. Wotal said, the gift is knowledge, sweet one, nothing more. I offer it unburdened in gratitude. No one has reached me here for a very long time. Her eyes were bright with love. I found myself pulled toward them. Only knowledge, I said, and opened my hands in acceptance. That protection no longer serves you. Which is so true, right? Sometimes we carry these protections that no longer serve us. I'm gonna take a little break there. In this scene, I also mentioned briefly the ceremony of the Nightbird. Did anybody figure out what the ceremony of the Nightbird was when you read it? No? No? It's one of my favorite things. Sometimes I'm too subtle, I think, but it's a little puzzle. The ceremony of the Nightbird is a conception ceremony. It's a ceremony for people who are having trouble giving birth, but specifically it's a conception ceremony for queer community where there are donors within the temple who donate for people who want to give birth. There are people who volunteer. In modern day we call it surrogacy, but they serve as nest for the ceremony of the Nightbird. In the book, the Nightbird is they brought the Twin Serpents from the dream into the waking world to form the waking world. I think this book was one of the most, well, it was definitely the most, well, up until now, because I'm finishing book 2, but it was one of the most difficult things I've done, because I wanted to create this fantastical world that was based on my ancestry without being disrespectful. And that was really, really challenging. I struggled with it for years, and I asked myself over and over again, who am I to write this book? Do I have the right to write this book? And then I was like, that's also the colonialist in my head telling me that I am not allowed to tell my own story and what it means to me. there were people who asked me, why didn't I write this within cultures that exist? I'm like, because they exist, because they're living cultures, because they either living or transitioned. I don't want to be disrespectful and I don't want to upset any gods, that is not the way to go. And I wanted to, kind of trust my own ancestral imaginings. A big part of my creative process and my life process is meditation. And so my meditation before I would write the book, I have a little altar that I would set up and have candles and water there. And I talk to my ancestors and I would sit and I would meditate with the characters in the book and with the landscape of the book. And I would say, I trust you. I trust the story that is choosing to come through me. And it's going to be okay. And every step of the way it was. And sometimes I'd write things, I'm like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. And then 5 chapters later, it would all come full circle and it would make sense again. And I'm reminding myself again as I work on book 2 that to trust the story, choosing to emerge through me. Oh. See, I was looking for the round clock. ADHD is so amazing because things will literally be invisible to you that are right there if you're not looking for them very specifically. It's like, I don't know if anybody else's diagnosis, but you don't look with your eyes, you look with your imagination so often. And there's so many times where if I don't have that imagination very present, I can't see things that are right in front of me. I'm going to go to chapter 12 to write this is actually my favorite scene. Chapter 13. Chapter 12 has my favorite part of the dream, just because I wanted to write like fantastical place, a spiritual place. And I thought, well, if I'm writing a spiritual place, there's also going to be parties there. So, because I know that my family, we have any excuse to be joyous and any excuse to party. And in fact, our funerals are some of the greatest parties that we have. And I'll just do 2 little pages from this, and then maybe if anybody has any questions or requests or anything about the world, we can go into that. When I arrived in dreaming, I arrived to a dance. Drum beats filled the air, a heavy rhythm that resonated in every aspect of the dream. It pounded in me as if I were a part of it. Around me, spirits in a dizzying array of shapes writhed their bodies. I marveled at spirits shaped like large birds with long, wide feathers that changed colors on beat to the drums. Jaguar-spotted spirits shaped like women leaped back and forth over my head, while colorful hairless dogs danced a serpentine dance starting between my legs. I gasped when I saw a spider-shaped spirit shoot a golden thread out from her body into the sky. It's actually like right out of FKA Twigs video that I was watching when there's a video called Cellophane, and I had that on in the background while I was writing the scene. And every time that I read the scene, I always just see her spinning. The things that show up in your writing, you just never know. So. Several spirits began climbing the thread, spinning around and around, howling. I'd never seen anything like it before. I couldn't stop myself from joining. I lifted my arms above my head and spun around, feeling sparks against me whenever I brushed up against a spirit. Flowers bloomed around my feet as I danced, opening their wide faces to the night and releasing a heady scent that made me want more. Above us, the comet shone in the sky, higher than it appeared in the waking world. I wanted more, though of what I couldn't name. The drum beats intensified, and so did our movements. Soon we moved as one, rising and falling, rising and falling. The scent grew stronger. I smelled earth, rain, smoke, ocean salt. The air tasted sweet in my mouth. I opened for more. Dreamers never dance with us or even notice us, a voice whispered in my ear. I spun around to see a mass of dancing lights. I blinked and moved back a few steps, the lights following. We're happy to have you here. We've been waiting for you. I dipped my head in gratitude. I've been waiting for something. Is this it? This is part of it. You should probably move somewhere else in the dream. This place is one of temptation and you have no training, the light said. Training. I stopped dancing, head spinning while others whirled around us. Our dreamers trained in Alcanza? Yes, which is why they can't go the places you can. They trained it out of themselves. The lights blinked on and off. I watched the way they shone. They seemed to glow softly on the edges of memory and somehow brightly on possibility. I was drawn to them in a way that felt enticing and dangerous. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. Go now, dreamer. Go where you are called. The lights moved until they surrounded my head, my throat, my heart, spinning around and around until I couldn't even remember my own name. And then they were gone and I was alone. Any questions, comments, requests here in the fluorescent lighting? Also, I can hear the fluorescent lighting. It's another like weird, I don't know if anybody else has that. We're just like, oh, I can hear it. Yeah, what's your question?
You mentioned pleasant surprises, but are there any other times where like you get something you're like, no, unfortunately this just isn't gonna work? Like writers get that all the time. So how do you rationalize that?
Oh, there's no rationalizing it. You just have to grieve it. And I think there was so much that I had to grieve as part of my creative process. And I think that was something I had to learn. You know, when I first sold The Lost Dreamer, it was just in Dear Story. It was supposed to be a trilogy originally. And then they had me take book 1 and 2, chop them in half and weave them together, except I hadn't written book 2, so I had to just write it. And there were so many storylines and characters and things that just I had to get rid of, and I grieved really, really hard because I put so much love into them. And there were just things that didn't work. That just didn't work at all, that I had to grieve and be like, well, Liz, you thought that you were wrong. I think one of my favorite scenes I wrote is gone. It was this beautiful market scene that was so much fun, and it was just really rich and erotic, and there was just so much going on, and I had to get rid of it. And I grieve that scene to this day and I want to figure out how to get it back in my body of work. But sometimes you have to grieve and forgive yourself if you write something that doesn't work, and move on and realize that no work is wasted, right? Like everything you do will eventually serve something that comes in the future. What's going on in that other class?
I know, yeah.
You know, like what class is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Mhm.
So when you're creating a story, do you have a goal in mind, or do you have a vision of who's gonna be reading your book? Like who's that person you see holding your book, experiencing what you created, and you're sharing it with the world? Like what vision did you get with that?
I think in so many ways, I write for little Liz, you know, I got all emotional, but you know, little Liz was so lonely and so sad, and she didn't see herself in these books. So I think in so many ways, I write for my younger self. You know, this story is a love letter to her. It's a story for her. And I know that if she likes it, then other people will like it too, you know. I don't really have like, you know, structurally I write toward, I know my book is going to end and that's it. And so I have that as a goal, but I don't necessarily know how I'm going to get there. And sometimes I'll hit dead ends and I'll screw up, but I also write toward an emotion that I want the reader to feel. You know, I'm like, what do I want the reader to feel, or little Liz to feel at the end of the book? And hopefully that is that even through grief, that there's hope, that there's optimism. But I write for little Liz and little brown girls who never got to see themselves in the book, or anybody who wants to see, you know, anybody who loves story. But at the heart of it, like, I have pictures of me as a child above my desk. Well, when I had a desk, I got rid of a desk now and I just write on a chair. But I had all these childhood pictures of me, and I can see my sadness in those pictures. I can see my longing for more. And so I would write to that version of me. And this book is a promise that I made her. And I'm really grateful that I got to keep it, that I got to keep all the promises I made to that little girl. It's a gift. I don't think a lot of us can say that. Yeah.
In this book, there's so many amazing, like fantastical elements to it, and like the characters and the environments that they're in. I was just wondering then, like, what would you say are some of the like realism things that you brought in from the world that we are and like implemented into a book with such like fantastical elements? Like, was it hard trying to weave the two together? Or?
I don't know. It's interesting because I think that there is a lot of fantastical elements to the book, right? It's a fantasy. And I come from a family that is very fantastical. You know, we all believe in, we talk about my dreams and we talk about dreams. Like my grandmother's a dreamer. I haven't mentioned this. I go to the same place every night when I dream. And that's how this book was born. I go to the same place every single night. I have my own house there. I have my own world. I have my own landscape. I was there this afternoon when I was taking a nap. And my grandmother's a dreamer. And when I was growing up, I grew up in a very like just a matriarchy of badass women, you know, and they didn't hide anything. Like they were just talking all the time, and the kids, if you're just quiet, you could hear all sorts of things and learn things. And so I would just hear all these fantastical things about our family and about our lineage and about grandma having these psychic dreams and all these things. And so that kind of wove itself into the book. And I think the realism is probably the relationships that I have. My family is just filled with like really strong women and lots of aunties and cousins and mess and chaos. There's bickering and fighting, and we love each other so fiercely all the time, even when we don't really like each other. And so I try to put that into this world. But the fantastical elements just kind of showed up, you know, like you don't even know it's our subconscious minds are so incredible. And there's so much in there. And I think being a fantasy reader my entire life, like things just kind of wove themselves. Like I can see influences from all sorts of books. When I read, there's so much Clan of the Cave Bear in this book. Weirdly, when I go through and read it, I was like, man, when I read that when I was 12, it was so influential. There's a ton of Clan of the Cave Bear in here. There's homages. There's an homage to The Secret Garden when the hummingbird shows Saya the cenote, the water hole. That is an homage to The Secret Garden. There's like just things from everywhere pop up. And I think that's and you don't realize it when you're doing the work. It's not until afterwards where you go through and like, oh, I can see the imprint of my life and my experience in these pages. I thought I was making everything up, but it all comes from somewhere.
I know my students will have more questions when we get back in the classroom. However, is there anything you can tell us about book 2?
Yeah, it's really hard. What can I tell you about book 2 that's interesting? Book two is called The Twin Serpents, which I have tattooed on my arm, which I, as a gift to myself when I turned in the book. And also I got this on the election day of the last presidential election, so I wouldn't watch the news. I was like, if I'm gonna be in pain, it's gonna be worth it. So the next book is called The Twin Serpents because they're so a huge part of book 1. And it is, you know, a really hard love story between Indira and Saya, who really, really want to love each other and don't know how. And so it's actually funny because I'm struggling so much with the book that next week my therapist and I are having a session for my characters where I'm gonna role play both my characters, and she's read the book and she loved it. And I was like, Ashley, can we have a session for her? She was like, oh my God, yeah, we're gonna do this. So we're gonna have a session for my characters where I'm gonna pretend to be both of them, and she's gonna do some family therapy for us to figure out, you know, how to move forward, because it's a love story, but it's a love story for people who love each other but don't know how to communicate. So any other questions? Yeah.
Which of your characters do you resonate more with?
Oh, it's really funny because I feel like when I started the book, I was Indira at the beginning of the book, and then at the end, I was Indira at the end of the book, just like wrecked and totally just scarred. But the one I would love to resonate with is Naki, like the Jag warrior who's at the end. Like I cosplayed her for Comic-Con. If you look at my Instagram, I spent 3 hours with 2 body painters covering my entire body in jaguar paint. And I was so mad that people thought I was wearing a bodysuit. They didn't even compliment like all the work I put into being painted for 3 hours. But I would like to be her. Yeah, I think different parts of me are different characters. I know with a lot of the anxiety and depression that I've experienced, like I really, Saya, in some moments in my life, I feel like Saya just completely lost. When I was hanging out with my family this last weekend, we just did a family vacation to Mexico. I definitely felt like Ishara, one of the aunts who's just like, "Bah, bah, 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 I'm sick of everybody, you know? So I think I just resonate with different characters, but I would say probably Indira the most, because I put her, I destroyed her. I really did. I wrote a letter of apology to her when I finished the book. I was like, I'm so sorry, dude. Like, I put you through it. Yeah, I destroyed her. So, but I feel like I resonate with her, that she just had to keep trusting the story and moving forward no matter what. And I'm trying to weave parts of her backstory, you know, those missing years, into book 2. And that's, I don't know if that'll make it into the final draft, but there's some really, she went through some shit. So I want that somewhere in the pages for sure.
Let's thank Liz so much. I just want to remind y'all that there are copies of The Lost Dreamer. Oh, wait, do we have
Oh,
any
yeah,
copies?
and I have posters if anybody wants.
Ooh, and posters.
I have a few posters.
You want the posters?
Oh, okay. So if you need a copy, you better get back there, and perhaps Liz will be kind enough to sign it before we go. Thank you all again. I hope to see you on Zoom in 2 weeks. I know Zoom, it's okay. And then we're back here in person next month. So we'll see you then as well. Get home safe.